Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to another episode of Tuesday Takes here on the Dirty Birds of Brews podcast presented by FanDuel. He's Tre'Shon Diaz. I'm Kevin Knight. We are here to bring you guys the latest Falcons news, and the news, of course, is that Matt Ryan is the new head honcho, the new big cheese, the top dog. Matt Ryan has gone from being a franchise legend to the man running the show, Tre'Shon. And I think quite the change for the Falcons here at the top. We've been expecting this move for a while. Became official over the weekend. Matt Ryan gave his press conference on Tuesday morning, which we're recording after that, so we can bring you guys any little nuggets that we found in there. But an exciting turn of events. I think you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone that's upset about the control of the team changing hands to Matt Ryan, because I think if you had to pick a single player that is probably the most unifying among every former Falcon, it's probably Matt Ryan. So quite the move and quite the different direction for this Falcons team, Tre'Shon.
Yeah. Even Matt Ryan's biggest haters are happy he's back because now they can go back to blaming everything on him. And this time it makes a little bit more sense with him being in that presidential role, Kevin. So yeah, I think you'll be hard pressed to find anybody that's upset about this move. And now we're on to the next moves, and it seems like the Falcons are going to have a pretty big list of options to kind of comb through in what was projected to be a really bad head coaching cycle. It seems like a third of the league decided that they all wanted to jump in, and just kind of goes back to how we talk about the perception of whatever national media thinks is happening versus what is actually happening within those closed doors. It's very interesting to just kind of see how this offseason is already starting to play out.
Yeah, a lot of teams all decided, you know what, maybe we should get in on this cycle after all. And it's funny because I think the perception of this coaching cycle was very negative for a long time. And then it was like, Stefanski's out. Okay, I'm interested. And it's like, all right, well, John Harbaugh's out. Oh, okay, maybe Matt LaFleur will be out. And no, that one didn't work out. But Tomlin is also out, although it sounds like he's going to take a year off from coaching. But, Mike McDaniel's on the market as well, and there's quite a lot to unpack in that coaching search. It's definitely something we're going to get into a little bit today as well, because that's probably the most intrigue of any position is almost always the head coach, and that's no exception for the Falcons, who are looking like quite a job opportunity, and it seems like the candidates agree for the most part. It seems like the Falcons are going to have all the top candidates in the building, and will probably be, I would say, one of the top two jobs, depending on who you ask. I mean, a lot of people, depends on your opinion of the Giants, probably, in terms of if you think they're 2 or 3. But it's going to be a fun cycle, and, we'll see how it shakes out. But these Falcons are not, I think, I don't think it was an opinion shared by a ton, but there was definitely a section, I think, of sort of national media types that were like, well, the Falcons have no quarterback, and they have no first-round pick, and they have no money, so no one will ever want to go there. This is a bad job. And I don't think I shared that opinion. I don't think you shared that opinion, because there's a lot more to a team than who's their quarterback, do they have a top draft pick, and do they have cap space? Because we know cap space is fake for the most part. So the Falcons are going to have cap space if they want it. That's pretty much always been the case, except for maybe the year Thomas Dimitroff left, and that year they actually did not have any cap space. That was legitimately true. But this team, I think, is well set up for a quick turnaround. And I think there's a lot of other factors here that make it an intriguing job. But one of those factors might be Matt Ryan. And that's probably where we'll start the conversation. Matt Ryan's got an enormous amount of respect. He apparently has spent the last 3 years talking to Bill Cowher, which is like, yeah, that's a good guy. That's a good guy to talk to about this stuff. Almost like, he was kind of getting prepared for this by just getting to talk and interact with a lot of former coaches, former players, just the whole spectrum while he was in media. Got to sit in on a lot of production meetings, got to learn a lot about the league and how these teams operate, that in addition to obviously being involved in it himself for an extended period of time as a quarterback. So he seems like he would have sort of the right amount of sort of institutional knowledge from his time in the league, from a player's perspective, from sort of a budding executive perspective, but he's also kind of enough of an outsider that you think maybe he's going to inject some of the needed change that we need into this franchise. But what do you think so far? I mean, I like the press conference. I like everything we've seen at this moment, but what do you think about the new direction of this team under Matt Ryan?
Yeah, I think you did a good job there of kind of explaining how there is some familiarity, but there's enough of an outsider's perspective that he's not going to settle for what has taken place, over the past, 5-10 years. And and I think a good example of that is that Raheem Morris could have still been here. Matt Ryan still could have gotten this job. And from what we know, they were talking to Matt about this early, and I wouldn't think that they didn't already counsel him or get his opinion on some things. And the fact that the team cleaned house, everything, Ryan is a part of that. And I remember posting a joke when these rumors first started that he was going to clear out the building like he's Ari Gold. And a lot of people were like, Matt's not going to do that. He's going to be a company man. He's going to stay loyal to McKay. He's going to stay loyal to Raheem because they coached this, that, the other, they played whatnot. And that's not the case. And I think that kind of shows you how much fans maybe underestimate the winner's mentality that has existed within Matt Ryan during his entire professional career. I don't think Boston College has been relevant since he's been there. This is a guy who wants to win and knows how to win in difficult places. It's not easy to win at Boston College. It's not easy to win in Atlanta. And so I think that he has a clear vision. And, a lot of his focus seemed to be on the very simple things such as accountability and just really having some form of an identity. And that's something that we've talked about with this Falcons team under Raheem Morris and even, in the Arthur Smith era, was that they never really seemed to figure out who they were. I think Arthur Smith had a little bit more of an identity. He just had a problem of realizing it and making it come to fruition there. And so I like where things are headed. And, it appears that, Matt Ryan himself has some good connections for some potential GMs and head coaches. And, to hit back on the point that you started off with when people kind of talked about, the initial reaction of this job. And I also remember some people having it more towards the lower end. And then those all pro votes came in. And then
the haters
kind of like, oh, the Falcons have 4 all pros, and one guy won 2 all pro spots on his own, Bijan Robinson. And then like, oh, okay, I guess if I don't know, somebody who's proven they can get it done with a bridge quarterback, they could probably come into this team. And you look at the NFC South, their winners were just 8-9. Okay, yeah, this job really isn't that bad. As some may have initially perceived it. For me, I always kind of had it in the middle of the pack, right? Like there are some serious questions around a very important position, but there's enough talent around. And I think Arthur Blank has proven that he's a good enough owner that coaches are going to want to work with this franchise and work under him. So I think that things are off to a really good start in the Matt Ryan era.
Yeah, I think so too. And, I think the presence of Ryan himself and sort of the new direction for this team, I think is maybe a kind of a key part of this job being more interesting to a lot of these candidates. I think this new structure, the Falcons are just the latest team to kind of get in on this structure with either like a former player, former coach, executive coming in. I think the Lions kind of made it most famous with the Chris Spielman addition there. And you can see how that team has turned around in a major way since then. But the Titans, I think, are trying to have that sort of structure too. And while it does make the GM search, I guess, a little bit more complicated because Matt Ryan is now considered like the primary executive instead of the GM. So they have some like restrictions about when they can talk to GMs now because they're secondary candidates or secondary people instead of primary. That's not a huge deal, and again, we'll talk about GM. There's not as much intrigue there, I think. I know Tre'Shon and I kind of have one guy in mind. I think probably the Falcons do too, but we'll see how that plays out. But I just think Ryan's so personable and also so just kind of down to earth, no nonsense. Like, I think he just connects instantly with a lot of people. And I think what he said in the press conference was like, I have no agenda. Like, I literally just want to come in and make this team win. He's got no politicking going on. He hasn't been in the building. He didn't have a take on Raheem Morris or Terry Fontenot or any of the stuff that happened before. He's coming in now completely neutral. just looking at everything like, okay, how is this going to help us win or not? Like, I don't really care who chose to sign Michael Penix or who wanted Kirk Cousins. It doesn't really matter to me. I just want to win. I don't care who hired X coach or fired Y coach or whatever. And that sort of neutrality coming in, sort of totally clean slate, I think appeals to a lot of these coaches where it's like, I don't have to worry about coming in and getting in the middle of a power struggle between a team president and like a general manager or like the owner and some front office person. Like, this is a clean slate. The guy that's in charge of me is hiring me, and there's not really any question marks here. It seems very clear. And I think that clarity is something this team's been missing for over a decade now, because even when the team talked at length about, oh, Rich McKay's not involved anymore, where he clearly was, like it, and then he's been shuffled out again, which makes it even more clear that he was still involved. Like, if we didn't know the truth, maybe some people in the national landscape or some of these coaches could have divined it somehow, but like those questions and the shadows that kind of overhang all those interactions, that can't have been good for this team. It certainly wasn't providing them the clarity that they needed, and this fresh start seems like the perfect opportunity to find that clarity, whatever it looks like for them, whatever path they want to take. At least Matt Ryan should be able to get them on the same page. That's the hope.
Yeah. And I think that, I think Matt Ryan has a little bit more cachet to kind of push back against some of these figureheads too. Like, this isn't, a former assistant to a GM or whatever, where, Rich can maybe flex a little bit more. We're like, well, I was a GM once too. Now you're kind of dealing with, I think, Matt Ryan's true role, which based on what he sounds today is like, he is that mediator. He is that person who's going to make sure that the vision is, on point and that everybody is aligned. And that if he feels that, there's some deviation from that alignment, then he's going to be there to correct it. He's kind of the, I think, final voice on that to really just kind of come together and be like, all right, so we're all on the same page. This is the plan of the attack. There's really no excuse anymore for things kind of feeling segmented or that there isn't really a plan. I don't think we're going to see the next GM having to explain on draft night to Arthur Blank why they just made a move that they made. It's, when you look back at some of these things, it's very clear that they were not operating with a clear plan, and that they would be ones to freelance. And I think freelancing is kind of what got them in trouble from a front office standpoint at times. And then, we already kind of know all the issues with accountability when we look towards the coaching staff and the way that, they expect players to be held accountable, the way they expect coaching members to all be held to the same I think merit. And that was something that we saw this past season clearly didn't happen. There were coaches being held to different standards than others, guys fired when others got to keep their jobs, and kind of even the same with the players, some getting to be bad for weeks before they got pulled, others very short leash. So I think it's kind of just getting back to, having a football team where everybody understands, what the goal is, and everybody feels that they are all being held to the same standard.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And that was something I think was really emphasized during the press conference, was accountability, just at all levels. And I think Blank made a point of getting back to it multiple times, which to me,
yes, he did.
I think is very pointed. And he's not trying to disrespect anyone or like dunk on Raheem Morris or anything like that. But I think he is trying to emphasize that this was not done right. And it's really, and we know that it wasn't done right. Speaking to media and fans that are paying attention, we know this. We know this as well. This is not going to be a thing anymore. This is really important to us. And like Blank said, it's not just holding players accountable. It's holding coaches accountable, and notably assistants and coordinators and things of that nature. And I think that was really, that inconsistency, like you said, Tre'Shon, was a big part of it. And also just that it didn't seem like there was an ability to, like, Raheem didn't really do that. Like, last year we saw it with Jimmy Lake. Lake was basically getting replaced midseason by Raheem kind of stepping in, but no change was made until after the season. And then Raheem even gave him another shot to close out the year, and obviously that didn't go well, and he ended up getting fired for it. Zach Robinson had a number of issues, and Raheem doesn't really have the experience to take over that role. And they also made, we've talked about this before, didn't have anyone else they could hand play calling to. So I understand not moving on from Zach Robinson because there's just no one else here that can do it. But with special teams, as much as we all personally really like Marquise Williams, it was clear that a change needed to be made there, and no changes were made. And I think, that combined with the inconsistency with the players and the coaching staff, that was probably one of the biggest reasons that they knew they had to move on from Morris. For whatever reason, Morris, the executive, the guy that had to go into these meeting rooms and be like, as much as I respect you, Marquise, like, this is not working, and this is the deadline. Like, if we can't get this figured out by now, we're going to have to go in a different direction. It didn't seem like that was ever something, maybe it was discussed, but it was never implemented. And it didn't result in any positive change. And I think Raheem's method of, like, we're going to have great communication. I don't say this ironically. I think this is actually really important to him, that we're going to have open dialogues and we're going to have great communication and we're going to fix our problems together. Sometimes some guys don't have the answers, right? Sometimes guys are proud and they don't feel like they need to change what they're doing. But sometimes you have to make those changes. And I think that was something that, for whatever reason, Raheem Morris wasn't comfortable doing and didn't do. And that was one of the biggest reasons they needed to not only move on from him, but also put someone else in place that if these relationships get too fraught, that they can be the one, Matt Ryan specifically, to say, hey, we have to do this. Like, I know, you guys are close, but, like, this is not working. We have to make a change now. And I think that's another benefit of this role, is that Blank needed someone else that had the authority and, like you said, the cachet to be able to step in and make these hard decisions when, for whatever reason, the next guys, which would be the head coach and GM, for whatever reason, weren't able or willing to make those decisions.
Yeah, and, I think that when you look at it from the perspective of Blank, too, when we talk about not moving on from Marquise Williams when it was probably time in the season and things like that, you have to remember that the Falcons under Arthur Smith went from one of the leanest coaching staffs to then Raheem Morris staff, who he brought in a ton of coaches, and yet he seemingly did not staff it with coaches that he felt confident enough with to kind of take over for other duties if they needed to. We talk about this with Zach Robinson, and that, like, there's nobody really behind him on this team when you actually look at who is on this staff that can actually take over, that you would feel comfortable with that if a midseason change was to be the move. And the same can be said with Marquise Williams. And then the best option for the receiving room was TJ Yates, who we all learned during the Arthur Smith era. He is not the guy to be coaching wide receivers. Yeah. It's some of our worst years for our wide receivers have all been coached with TJ Yates having the bulk of the season of being the receivers coach. And so it became very clear that, like, Morris failed as at a staffing level to a very large degree. Like, it was so much more than just looking at it at the coordinator positions. It was the people underneath it too. Didn't really seem to have the ability to step up when called upon. And, as they say, this is a next man up league, and that applies to the coaching staff, not just the players. And so I do think that, at this point, there's going to be a much more keen eye in terms of who's brought in, who's on these staffs. And I think not that there will be less freedom, but I just think that there's going to be a little bit more scrutiny in terms of, like, okay, if your coordinator gets fired, if something was to happen to them, is his assistant somebody you actually believe in to be able to do the job to come up next? Like, when we look at the Dan Quinn era and we look at all of the people that were on that coaching staff and how they've splintered off and gone in multiple directions and been able to have successful careers, outside of Ryan Nielsen, it's kind of been up and down for him, no one from Arthur Smith's coaching tree has had success moving forward. Nobody from Raheem Morris's coaching tree, I don't anticipate, we'll see what happens, but they're not necessarily being, hunted after for jobs now that they're all available on the market. Even Morris himself isn't. And so I think you have to really, understand, like, when you look at it from Blake's standpoint, you look at it from the team building standpoint that Matt Ryan is now in position, I do feel that there's just going to be more of a focus on having the right people, not just having your people.
Yes, I think that's a key thing, and I'm glad you brought it up, is that, Raheem Morris, part of the reason that I was in favor of the hire, and I think a lot of people were, is that he has this giant network that he can draw upon, and the belief is that he can build this all-star staff, and that, you know, he can be the CEO because his staff will be so good. And instead of going out and getting these guys, I think a lot of people were excited about Zach Robinson, so I think it's not really fair to
For
dunk
sure.
on
That's,
that
you
one.
know, you take a swing on a McVay disciple
Yeah.
and you miss, you miss.
Yeah, that's totally fine. And then, you know, Marquise Williams made sense. He had coordinated pretty solid special teams under Arthur Smith, and that side of the ball wasn't really a problem at that time. Jimmy Lake was the one that I think everyone scratched their heads on, because it's like, well, you know, what has he done to deserve this? And you know, what about all these other guys? There's like this laundry list of guys, and then the assistants on defense were pretty solid. You know, the Falcons are probably going to end up keeping, I would think, most of these guys around still. You know, and obviously his second crack at Jeff Ulbrich was much better, but you know, Jeff Ulbrich is probably going to be one of the most coveted defensive coordinators in the NFL, which is why the Falcons are very wise to hold on to him until such time as this new coach says, I want him or not. I hope the new coach is smart enough to keep him around. But, you know, the one I could see is, like, if they do get like Stefanski, maybe Stefanski wants Jim Schwartz, and, like, okay, I get it. Like, Jim Schwartz is also a great defensive coordinator, but maybe he'll get the Browns head coach job. Who knows? But, yeah, I think it's not just the coordinators, like you said, and we brought this up all last year. It was like, well, what happens, like, if you were on such thin ice with Ike Hilliard, why didn't you bring in a wide receiver assistant or somebody else that, like, okay, if this boils over again, and we because apparently they were considering firing him last year, did nothing, didn't bring in an assistant, didn't bring in anyone else, obviously kept Ike Hilliard, and then apparently it boiled over so quickly that he was gone in 3 weeks, and they had no receivers coach. So, you know, again, it's like the management, the executive side of Raheem Morris, which is even just more ironic because he was the CEO coach. Like, he's not calling the plays, so he should have more time to handle these things. That was where the biggest failures happened, and you know, that ended up being the felling blow, I think, for Raheem's tenure in Atlanta, was that the staff was, you know, on second attempt for defensive coordinator, the defensive staff was great, but the other two pieces of the football team were not there, and there didn't seem to be a cohesive plan. And I think that was the thing that maybe irked Blank most of all, given that other than accountability, the main thing they've harped on is we need a singular vision that's shared by everyone in the building, that we all want the same thing. And it's like, man, who are they talking about? Who wasn't with the program? Was it Raheem? Was it Fontenot? Who the hell knows? But all we know for sure is that what we saw on the field, which was incohesive, was what they were saying, what it was like behind closed doors. There wasn't a cohesive vision, and that is one of the biggest things that Matt Ryan's being brought in to change.
He is. And so who do you think, Kevin, is going to help Ryan execute this vision? Because that's where we are now in this process.
Yeah, I mean, the coaching, you know, we'll start with GM because that one's very simple, I think, and it won't be a surprise to anyone that's been following, you know, anything. But on the GM side, I'm pretty confident they're going to hire Ian Cunningham from the Bears, and I know you are as well, Tre'Shon. And he's a fascinating hire, I think, in terms of the organizations that you would want someone brought up under, you know, the Ravens and the Eagles, and this being probably one of the architects of this Bears rebuild. We don't know to what extent, but he was certainly involved in it. That's 3 big thumbs up for me. You know, I can't really think of, you know, he's going to learn the aggressive salary cap management and what it looks like to do that successfully from the Eagles, as well as their ethos and how they build their team through the draft. And then the Ravens obviously are probably the model franchise for how to draft and manage draft capital. And then the Bears rebuild, this is how you do a quick turnaround, right? That is the Chicago Bears. And, you know, to me, he checks all the boxes. I mean, who knows how the hell it's going to go, but I can't think of any better tutelage that I would want for my general manager candidate at this stage.
Yeah. You know, I am also, you know, under the impression at this point that it's going to be Ian Cunningham. I think just the way the Falcons are moving through this process, and that they don't seem to be in a rush. And it feels like the top candidates that they would want are currently in the playoffs, which that's great. We think you definitely want to be able to try to tap into the guys that are succeeding the most right now. And Ian Cunningham definitely seems like that guy. You know, it's always hard to project and know for sure with the GM types, but kind of like how you laid it out, Kevin, you know, when you look at his resume, you know, one of the last students of Ozzie Newsome in the Ravens, and then being able to spend time with the Eagles as well. And this is also somebody we know that's turned down jobs, you know, a couple of jobs. And so he's very sought after and respected in his business. And I would look at him as the top GM candidate, period. Not just for the Falcons, but I think in terms of all available GMs, he's really the guy that, you know, they would want. I thought it was interesting that the Dolphins didn't even really waste time. You know, they made the move for their GM quite quickly, which kind of signaled to me like, all right, they know that they're not even in the running for the Ian Cunningham job. And I think there's going to be a couple of other franchises like that as well, who kind of know that they're already on the outside looking in. And that really is going to help, I think, the Falcons in the long term, because this next head coach is going to want to be paired, I think, you know, with a guy and with somebody that, you know, they feel that they have the confidence in, and that it's not just some, you know, okay, this is this year's, you know, assistant that seems to be getting all these glowing reviews, but this is somebody who year over year has gotten the respect of people within the league. And he's helped, you know, I think the Bears build and be able to construct a solid team that you know, based on what we're seeing right now, is only going to get better in the years to come, because this Bears team, the way I look at them, they were constructed to make the wild card, and they overachieved. That defense is not that great when you look at like how they measure out across the league. This isn't a really good defense or anything like that. So, you know, you really expect that team to keep improving. And overachieving is something the Falcons haven't done in a long time, Kevin. They're classic underachievers. And they, you know, often don't maximize their talent that they have within a season. And so this feels like somebody who is going to help fix that problem and you know, really help start getting this team built right from the ground up.
Yeah. And I'm excited about Cunningham. I do think that, you know, his interest in the team signals a lot. Like you said, that the Dolphins were like, all right, well, we need to move on. And the Falcons seem totally calm about I mean, they're like, oh yeah, no, it'll happen when it happens. Yeah, we may interview some guys, you know, the rules are a little weird, whatever. It's like, yeah. They don't seem concerned to me about the GM search. And they really did, like, with these president interviews. They didn't really like talk about it today. They kind of like tried to downplay that, but those were more or less GM interviews for a lot of these guys, and I'm sure a lot of these guys knew that. But you know, based on who they talked to, I mean, you know, I know Tillis from the Panthers is respected as well. You know, all these guys, Josh Williams for the 49ers, he's pretty respected too. Like, these would all be like solid GM candidates, but it does seem like it's going to be Ian Cunningham, and it seems like Matt Ryan maybe zeroed in on him from the very beginning. And I would wager that they've had, as a part of his president interview, you know, they wanted to obviously hear what his vision for the team was, and the head coaches that he would want to work with. You know, as a part of his interview, I'm sure they may have, you know, laid out some plans for what, you know, Cunningham would like to see if he were to be hired as GM. So, Falcons may or may not need to wait to interview him a second time to go ahead and go forward with this head coaching decision. But speaking of the head coaching decision, a lot more jobs and a lot more coaches on the market than initially anticipated since the last time we talked even. And this class has become a lot more interesting. There's a lot more available than many were thinking. Now, Matt LaFleur does not appear to be coming available. I would be really surprised if at this point the Packers do change course and like, actually, nope, firing him. But other than Matt LaFleur, pretty much everyone else that was expected to come available has come available. So I'm curious, Tre'Shon, we talked a little bit about it last time, but you know, it's tough for me to like rank them at this point, but who is someone you'd really like to see? We can just sort of talk about our top guys, and then we'll save the rankings for after we get the full list of candidates that they're interviewing. But who's someone you'd really like to see at this point? It could be anyone from anywhere on your list.
Yeah. You know, I'll take the easy one first and go with Clint Kubiak. I like the clean slate. So much of the discussions around the other guys is about the baggage that comes with them, right? And so this is somebody who he's the upstart. He has the family tree, being the son of Gary Kubiak. And I think Clint has done a good job of kind of showing that he can get the job done when quality might be a question at the quarterback position. And that is something that's very difficult to do in this league. There's only like a handful of coaches that I think have been able to consistently prove that they have that ability. Kyle Shanahan being the most notable. And I also think it's just kind of good. I think this is a true reset to get somebody in who is coming in with kind of, no baggage at all and ready to prove themselves. I think that if you give him the kind of front office support that we're expecting here, and really kind of, let him take over this role and make it his own, that he's somebody that could have a lot of success. We know that he's going to have plenty of minds that he can lean on in both his personal and professional life. And I do like, what he's been able to do with his offenses in New Orleans and now with Seattle. I think there is like a little, when you talk about this as the unknown, is it going to be too much too soon for him? And I think that, there's some questions about, his offense has like kind of dipped, I think, at the midpoint of each season. But I think they've recovered pretty well this year. And to me, I don't really see any of those things as like crazy obstacles, because it's a crapshoot. Like at the end of the day, hiring a head coach, hiring a GM, so much, you can do all the work in the world, but there's so many factors at play that you don't know what's going to happen until you do it. But I like where he is at today, and I think that he would be somebody that would be good to jump into this new era of Falcons football with.
Yeah. I mean, you're definitely speaking my language with Kubiak. I was on the Kubiak train earlier this offseason when I thought the Falcons would be a less desirable job, especially that, like, this would be an opportunity to get a top offensive mind in here maybe a year early, and that's what you're going to have to do. If you're not one of the top jobs, you can't afford to wait, because you saw what happened with Ben Johnson. A lot of teams wanted Ben Johnson. They waited for him. Only one team can get Ben Johnson, right? So Kubiak could be the Ben Johnson of 2026, or not. When you're hiring one of these unproven head coaches, I would say Kubiak is the riskiest choice. But I do, the thing you love about Kubiak is all the things you said. Proven that he can get the most out of his quarterback. He can make a very quarterback-friendly scheme. He has also overcome offensive line problems in Seattle. That line cannot run block. And he's managed to get a functional run game out of it. And in Atlanta, he would not have that problem, obviously, because the Seahawks have good running backs. But the rushing of that offensive line has been a problem for years now, and that was their biggest issue. But he managed to make a functional run game out of it, partially because of the design. And in Atlanta, he wouldn't have those restrictions on the offensive line. I think whatever quarterback they bring in, you feel very confident in Kubiak being able to make them functional. And not having that tank your offense, especially if we see, Michael Penix maybe miss the first month of the season, or something like that. The bridge guy should be functional. So I really like Clint Kubiak. I have a really hard time placing him. He's going to be in my top 3. I have no doubt of that. But I think if they're trying to swing for the fences and they really love like his attitude and what he brings and his vision is coherent, that maybe I think what Ben Albright has said, which is that take Clint Kubiak seriously in these searches, and also like the Falcons are more interested in him than people might think, given who else they're interviewing. I think that's legit, and I think that Kubiak, it would not shock me at all if they do go that direction, and I certainly wouldn't have any qualms with it if they've talked to him and they feel confident, maybe in being able to surround him with some experience, like Jeff Ulbrich, perfect pairing, right? Where he has someone that can just manage the defense, doesn't need anything else. And Ulbrich, as a former head coach, not necessarily a long-term head coach, but he's been in the chair, could give that coaching and that mentorship to him, something that, the Falcons didn't necessarily bring in for some of their previous coaches. I think that's going to be really necessary for him, and getting him, some other offensive staff underneath him to help out, and an experienced special teams coach too would be good. But I really like Clint Kubiak, so I'm glad you brought him up. And we'll kind of stay on the offensive side of the ball with my guy. And I know he's also someone you like in Kevin Stefanski, which seems like the most controversial somehow of the coaching candidates.
Yeah, somehow.
But, I think Kevin Stefanski's story is so. You have to understand that he's paying the Browns tax every time he goes on the field. That organization is so poorly run and managed from ownership down to the coach that he's fighting uphill. And you can look at the Browns stats over the past 2-3 decades and see exactly what I'm talking about. And that he was actively sabotaged like by that team's decision making, their decision to trade for Deshaun Watson, which he's on record as not wanting anything to do with, did not ask for it, did not want it, was kind of blindsided by it. It's almost impossible to dig out of that problem. So Deshaun Watson came in there in 2022, and as we could tell, like, that was a disaster. And it tanked the team for almost his total tenure. Now, he also managed to get that team 11 wins despite Deshaun Watson one year. Like, he managed to get that done. And he's the only Browns coach in recent memory to have that team make the playoffs twice, let alone once, twice. And, I think he has his question marks in that he doesn't seem to have strong conviction about calling plays on offense. And if I was hiring him, I would want him to be calling plays on offense and trust himself. I do wonder if he's just got burned out in Cleveland the last 2 years and was just like, I just can't manage this shit show and call plays. Like, but I think what we've seen from him as a play caller has typically been excellent. He has managed to, I think, get great seasons out of several of his quarterbacks. And I think he's a really intriguing guy. He also brings with him that head coaching experience that's the main thing Kubiak doesn't have. He also has battled through a lot. He's been in the playoffs twice and also, struggled through some really difficult seasons and some really difficult obstacles and has come out the other side now. And I think that is the type of guy that oftentimes when you see them in their second stint, they've learned a lot and they can take everything that they've had to deal with, both good and bad, and come into that second stint much more well-rounded and much more prepared for the adversities that will come, certainly, in an NFL season. So I'm really into Stefanski. He may end up being my number one. I'm still deciding, but I know you're a fan of him as well. So I'm curious your thoughts on the Stefanski situation.
Yeah. Much has been made about, the Browns having, they've had 2 losing seasons back to back now with Stefanski. And that's not even close to the Browns' longest consecutive amount of losing streaks, just so everybody at home is clear. The Cleveland Browns have made the playoffs 4 times since 1990. 50% of those come under Kevin Stefanski. A lot of things that have been said about Stefanski aren't true. I think you pointed out one early already, which is, everybody seems to think that he was responsible for Deshaun Watson coming to the team. He was not. And regardless of however you feel about, Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, whatever, he still had a quarterback forced on him this season that he did not want. The real question for me is, how is Andrew Berry surviving Cleveland right now when he's really the one that's had as much of, if not more of a say in some of these moves than anybody? I think the biggest red flag to me is that he has given up play calling duties multiple times. And that's kind of where I'm at with you, Kevin, where I'm like, I need there to be some more confidence around that in terms of like what your vision is for yourself as the head coach at the next spot. Could it have been burnout? Maybe. Could it have been pressure from ownership? Since from what we know, the Haslams are basically calling him up and telling him what they want to be done. Anytime you're doing that to a coach, whether or not you agree that one player is better than the other, you're just thwarting all of their efforts. We saw Mike Shanahan's career end in Washington after they forced him to draft RG3, a player he never wanted. He ended up getting the quarterback he did want, Kirk Cousins, who ended up having the better career. We saw Jeff Fisher, who did not want to draft Vince Young. I don't know if people remember that. Jeff Fisher did not want to draft Vince Young. And then that whole thing ended up blowing up because it does not create the kind of environment that you want. Everybody has to be on the same page. everybody needs to be aligned and everybody needs to be held accountable. And so it kind of feels like Kevin would really relish the opportunity to go to an organization in which he knows there's a clear vision and everybody has their own job responsibilities laid out for them. He doesn't have to worry about his owner deciding that he wants to trade up and draft somebody on draft night and kind of just trash the plan that the team's been working on for months. And, you know, again, I just can't stress enough that the Browns have gone to the playoffs 4 times since 1990, and 2 of those times are with Kevin Stefanski, 2-time Coach of the Year award winner. And like you mentioned, you know, there is a Cleveland tax that comes with being in the Browns. It's not easy to recruit players to Cleveland, Ohio. It's, you know, they've done a good job of keeping Myles Garrett. All it's done is cost them every single penny they have. And so I think that when you examine, you know, his full situation, of course there's baggage. That's why pretty much most of these candidates are on the market right now, except for like the young guys like Kubiak, that they all come with some sort of baggage. But I do feel like that Stefanski's baggage has been so overstated and also misconstrued in terms of what he's been responsible for and what he hasn't been responsible for. So I think Stefanski would be a solid hire. And there's a couple other coaches that I would have in the same tier as him as well.
Yeah, and I think he's really interesting. I think he has a lot of upside, but again, you're looking at a guy that, you know, the big concern to me is he really going to call plays? Because if he doesn't want to call plays, I lose a lot of interest, you know, and we've talked about this at length. Like, you need your head coach to be your offensive play caller, if at all possible, because your offensive coordinator is going to get poached. If you get a good scheme in there and it works, especially with the players the Falcons have, that guy's going to be gone. And you're going to end up with like the Bucks, and you know, the Bucks lucked out on a second guy, right? It's like, oh, we found Liam Cohen, great, we can do this again. No, you can't. And the first time was also really lucky. So, you know, you got to avoid that if you can, and that's why I'm always team offense. But go to a completely different direction here, because I know everyone's going to ask about this guy if we don't talk about him. With John Harbaugh, who seems like the most coveted candidate, obviously has a ton of success. He's a special teams background coach, one of the only ones of that nature, head coaching in the NFL. Harbaugh obviously has a storied career and is immensely respected in the NFL. But the Ravens have been kind of perennial underperformers the last several years. We know Lamar Jackson's dealt with a number of injuries. We know it took them a while to get the offensive coaching right, although I think Todd Monken was definitely a step in the right direction there. The defense has been an issue lately. But Harbaugh still commands an immense amount of respect, and you can tell that by how coveted he appears to be now on the market. What do you think about Harbaugh, and where's he on your list?
Yeah, you know, I think there is a certain amount of respect that I have for Harbaugh because, you know, his teams, I'm used to watching them in the late winter pretty much every season. And it does feel like, though, as he's kind of hit the later years of his coaching career, that he's kind of struggled to overcome, you know, some challenges. And the Zach Orr hire is so brutal. I'm almost terrified that if he gets hired somewhere, he's going to double down on Zach Orr being the guy. And so that's kind of some of the things that, just based on the reports, and, you know, these are all, you know, just kind of rumors at this point, but this idea that he wants this extreme amount of control is a little bit worrisome to me, because the other thing with the Ravens is that they have year in and year out top 3 front office, and that front office has really built the foundation of those football teams. They've given him these players, and so I don't necessarily believe that Harbaugh has the ability to replicate that. And from what we've heard, he wants a lot of control over the roster. He wants to pick the GM. And some of those things might be smoke, right? Because we know that he's talking to some teams that do have GMs in place and things like that. But, you know, if he got hired to the Giants, if his stipulation was like, you got to get Joe out of here, I don't think that they would have an issue with firing their GM. But I don't think the Falcons are going to quite operate like that now. Just kind of based on what Matt Ryan was talking about today and his new role and the vision they have. And so I think that, you know, while Harbaugh has a great resume, I'm just not sure about his ability to really come into a situation like this And it's not that he's starting from the ground up, because I don't think that this is a team that's going to be completely torn apart, but it's not going to be set up like the rosters that he had become accustomed to with the Ravens. And so he's going to have to do a lot of more work. They're going to have to do a lot more work on that personnel side of things. And I'm just not really sure that I'm confident he's the right guy for this situation. We've also never really seen him operate without a really good quarterback. Like, he went straight from Joe Flacco to multi-time MVP Lamar Jackson. And so it's kind of like, and like whenever we see Cooper Rush and other guys get in, it's like, you got to do what you got to do. But I'm like, he's basically going to have to start the season with a quarterback just a little bit above that talent level, depending on whoever they can find in the offseason. I just don't know if I feel good enough about him and trusting him in that situation, or even really having the patience either, because Harbaugh's 63. How's he going to feel in 2 years if the Falcons are, maybe they've just bounced out of the wild card 2 years in a row or something like that, similar to a situation that kind of like Matt LaFleur's in. Is he going to kind of give in and be like, all right, well, I'm 65 now, 66, heading into my third year or whatever. It's time for me to start considering if this is really what I want to do. And then there's a little bit of concern of like, okay, are we going to hold on to a coach until they turn 70 years old? There's a little bit of like concern with that. We kind of saw this year that, those guys just aren't, really the guys anymore. The game kind of passes everybody by at a certain point. And it's no disrespect to him. I think that there's some opportunities out there that make a lot of sense for Harbaugh. I just don't know if this is really one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it was honestly a surprise to me to see that he apparently holds the Falcons in very high regard, and is really legitimately interested in this job, which is an honor. And I think having him in the interview room and getting his take on the roster and various things like that is very valuable. I think the thing with Harbaugh that you're getting is floor, right? Like, he's probably going to have this team in the playoffs every year. Like, but that him and Tomlin are kind of in the same boat. I think not to quite the same extent as Tomlin, but they haven't really been able to get past the best teams now. Like, they can be in the playoffs, and they'll probably be in the playoffs every year as long as their quarterback doesn't get hurt, and the operation will generally be clean. And they're going to get, for the most part, good coaches and good assistants. I mean, there's a laundry list of guys that have come and gone under Harbaugh that have gone on to have a lot of success in this league. But, I just, again, it's the offensive play calling thing. And, with him not calling plays for offense or defense and being that CEO guy, you do lose talent frequently. If you're as good as you want to be, you're going to be losing talent. You're going to be losing those coordinators. And Harbaugh's done a good job of replacing them eventually. Sometimes it's taken a few years, though. And I don't love not going for the offensive side of the ball. I know the Falcons are going to look hard, at everyone. But I'm very much with you that I think Harbaugh for me would probably be towards the back of my top three as opposed to the front, because, I just worry about what are we getting offensively, what's going to be replicable from the Ravens, because unlike Stefanski, where he's actively being held back by the front office and the moves that team makes around him, Harbaugh has had the best support and the best roster building that you can get. Maybe you could say the Eagles are better, but that's about it. And the fact that, that led to the playoffs every year, but how much of that is Harbaugh and how much of that is the roster? And is Harbaugh really elevating those guys, or is he just keeping them on track, which is still good? A lot of coaches don't even have that equilibrium there. But to me, I'm not sure he's as much of a needle mover as I want. And that's dangerous, because we're talking about, a guy in Stefanski that has dealt with some losing seasons here. And we've got in Kubiak, who's never been a head coach. So the risk level for those guys is higher, but I also feel like the reward level that you're looking for those guys is a lot higher too. And I do worry that a lot of Falcons fans are just so fed up with the losing. And believe me, we're there too. But I don't think we should be settling for floor just to get out of this losing streak, just to get to the playoffs, because you don't want to end up like, as much as Mike Tomlin has brought to the Steelers, including a Super Bowl, including a lot of playoffs, That's 7 straight playoff losses. That is all, that might even feel worse to fans than 7 straight not making the playoff seasons, because at least your hopes never get up, right? Like, you're never going into January like, all right, we're going to do this, and then have your hopes dashed in the playoffs. Like, I think people have maybe forgotten what that feels like. I don't want to feel that when I hire a head coach. I want there to feel like the sky is the limit for this team. And maybe the sky is, the ceiling is actually the floor or something if we go miss on like a Kubiak. But I don't think we should be putting a ceiling on this team, or starting with someone that's maybe more past aligned in their ethos and approach, because the idea is that you're hiring this guy to be the next Mike Tomlin, the next 15-year coach, and you're not going to be getting that obviously with either a Harbaugh or a Tomlin. You might be able to get that with a Stefanski, and certainly that would be in play for Kubiak. I mean, the dude's like, what, 40 years old? So, I mean, he might even be younger than that. I don't know. So, I think I still like to lean towards the ceiling with these coaching hires, and I think you're kind of on board with that as well.
Yeah. There is an argument that finishing 9-8 in the NFC South year after year will get you, first place and that
You'll get a
playoff
ticket.
home spot. You'll get the ticket, but you will get off at the first stop. You will not get to go till the end there. And so, yeah, I think the idea is that, like, well, yeah, let's hire the guy that's going to win the Super Bowl in his first 5 years, and then just kind of string us along with winning seasons for the next 10. That's a great scenario. I don't think that Harbaugh or Tomlin are going to just suddenly have this resurgence in that they've figured it out and they're with this new team, because they're both coming from pretty good organizations that really gave them, in my opinion, I think Omar Khan has a little bit more. I think he's a little bit more questionable. He's had the job since like 2002, since 2003, something like that. I'm kind of like, I would look at moving off him as GM, because the Steelers haven't necessarily performed the way that the Ravens have in the draft, but I still feel like both of those organizations have given those two enough time, enough resources for them to kind of figure it out. And if it's one of those things where it's like, if you can't figure it out at two of the most stable historic franchises in the NFL, I don't know if going to historically less stable or less successful franchises is really going to help you figure that out. It might make you realize how good you had it before.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying with that, and I feel the same way. It's not really a path I prefer to go down. I know that's going to be like sacrilege to some folks. That, look, I mean, Harbaugh is clearly on track to be a Hall of Fame head coach, and same thing with Tomlin. And I view those guys very similarly, that both are legendary coaches, but the legend does come to an end at some point, and it rarely comes to an end in a storybook ending. And a lot of people say this about players. It's like, I'd rather get off too early than too late, and I wonder now if we're on the too late end of that side. But I think both, Tomlin apparently is going to go to TV for a year, and we'll see how that actually plays out. The Steelers retain his rights, so he'd have to be traded. Nobody's trading for him right now. Maybe next year, but with Harbaugh, I don't think the Falcons are going to hire John Harbaugh. I believe that the Giants are going to hire John Harbaugh. And I think the Giants are like legitimately obsessed with hiring John Harbaugh. So, I mean, their media is ravenous for him. I think the whole team is. So I don't think the Falcons are that. I think the Falcons are very interested and are probably honored that he's interested, but I'm not really feeling it. I don't know if that's going to mean anything. It could just be total BS, but I do think that, Harbaugh will not end up in Atlanta. I certainly wouldn't be upset if he's the coach here. I think, again, he might be a good sort of 3 to 5 year guy that maybe gets the standard that we expect from this team up, but I'm just not sure he's going to be the one to take us to the Super Bowl. Maybe he can. We've seen guys have late career sort of resurgences and sort of continue to develop, but I think if you're looking for that, long-term head coach that's maybe going to, completely change change the face of the franchise, I think that Kubiak and Stefanski, to me, are the guys I feel like could do that. But I'm sure there will be a lot of opinions about, you want the guy with 2 losing seasons to change the face of this franchise? Yeah, 'cause there's more to coaching than, just that. There's a lot more context to digest with these guys. As I hope we've covered today, I hope we've given you guys some food for thought. I know there seems to be a large group of you guys that are totally against Stefanski because of the record. The record is not everything, and there's a lot of coaching that can be sabotaged. At the same time, you look at someone like Harbaugh, and we talked about it. He was supported better than anyone else, and you would think, what would Stefanski's teams have looked like if he had the Ravens roster? Like, I would have paid money to see Kevin Stefanski coach those Ravens teams with Lamar Jackson healthy in the playoffs and see where that went. I think Kevin Stefanski is an overachiever, and I think Harbaugh is more of a floor, consistency, culture kind of guy. And neither one is bad. I think they both have their strengths and weaknesses. But to me, I'd rather swing for a bright offensive mind. And, I think that's where the league is going. Although I agree with people that say, defense isn't dead. Bill Cowher, I guess, told Matt Ryan that. Defense is not dead, as we saw from the Texans game. The Texans absolutely strangled the Pittsburgh Steelers, despite turning the ball over 3 times. The Steelers had no chance. It didn't even matter. And I would love to have that defense, and I would support building that defense. And I think the Falcons are on their way maybe to having a very good defense. But offense is king, and keeping that side of the ball intact and moving in the same direction, I think, is what has kept these contenders every year contending. And that's where my loyalties lie. It goes all the way back to Arthur Smith. I like that hire. I think that hire was the right process. It didn't end up being the right man for the job, but I think the Falcons would be well served to go back to that well and realize, we were on the right track here. We just didn't get the right guy. And take another shot, because you got to keep taking shots until you hit, So that's kind of where my mind is with this whole search. Where are you at, Tre'Shon?
Yeah, I think I am very much kind of leaning towards I want the offensive guy. I want that play caller type here. But I do think for me, when I look back at who have been the most successful coaches the Falcons have had, I can't ignore that they've been defensive minded coaches, in Dan Quinn and in Mike Smith. And so I do think that, it's important to make sure you don't silo yourself off from those options. It's okay to have a preference. It's okay to want that offensive guy. But if you find somebody that you truly believe in on the other side of the football, that you think can get the job done, then, you have to trust yourself because you're the one making that call. And I would say go ahead and hire him. I think that, fan reaction probably won't be great at first, but sometimes, if you win, you'll be able to overcome that. You mentioned it earlier with offense and why it's important to have, if you're going to have a play caller, one side or the other, or a head coach that comes from the offensive side, you want him calling those plays, because even if you hire somebody on, like Kevin Stefanski and he doesn't take those plays, well, if his scheme is good, that OC is out. You have to replace him just like you would have to replace it if it was a defensive minded head coach at the same way. I think people usually feel a little bit better because they have the idea of the assistant QB's coach might be the next guy, then the QB coach that they already have on the roster and things like that. But I don't necessarily think it's always that simple. And I think that something that's, I can't remember who said this, but defensive coordinators are really good at evaluating offensive staff, was kind of a point that was made about how some of these guys who lose coaches have been able to survive a little bit longer without them. That's obviously not a statement of fact, because we've seen plenty of DCs fail at bringing in good offensive coordinators. But I do think that a lot of people don't appreciate the defensive coordinators enough in this league and their own ability to kind of understand who their competition is and who that they believe can run an offense that would be suitable to pair with the defense that they have in mind. With that being said, if you're one of the sickos on here that's are you guys seriously not going to talk about a defensive coaching candidate? I'll give you Brian Flores as somebody that I think fits the mold of he's going to have a vision. He's and I think that he's going to hold people accountable. And he's going to do it in his own way. He has that history with Matt Ryan. He is a play caller. He's been around a very good offensive mind himself. So I think that he'd be able to start off with somebody that, has his OC, that I would feel confident in his ability to kind of pick who that person is and understand. And, we know that he played with Matt Ryan back in the day at BC. And so he's somebody that I think, the team will get a good look at. And since he hasn't hit the names yet, and it seems like they've already talked to a couple guys, feels like they've been waiting to bring him in until Matt Ryan has been kind of in the job for a day or two, a little bit more comfortable. And I think that we'll be hearing his name hitting the list of candidates pretty soon.
Yeah. I think Brian Flores is someone that it will be a very popular name. His scheme clearly works. It would clearly work with Atlanta's personnel too, I think. And, I think he makes a lot of
sense. The NASCAR package.
Yeah.
Sounds a lot of fun.
Scary stuff. And he's a very good defensive coordinator. He's been a head coach before. I'm sure he's learned a lot. He is definitely someone very interesting. I would be surprised if the Falcons don't talk to him. And yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'm certainly not opposed to getting a great defensive coach in here either. I think we've seen, like with the Texans, that you can make it work. It's very possible. And so, yeah, I'm definitely open to considering defensive coaches. They've said they're going to cast a very wide net. They're going to try to find the best coach, period. That's what Matt Ryan said. And that's where they're going to be looking. So no matter what that coach is or who that coach is, what side of the ball, I think the Falcons are going to do their due diligence, and we'll see what they come up with. But have a feeling it's probably going to be at least another week, guys. I wouldn't expect anything super soon. Maybe next week if certain guys get eliminated, maybe they make a move faster. But look, if they're interested in Kubiak, it's not out of the question. They could be waiting until February. So by that point, we'll obviously know it's going to be Kubiak because they've just been waiting. But we'll see. And I'm really interested to see where this goes. But I certainly have a lot of hope, renewed hope in this team with Matt Ryan calling the shots. I think it's going to be a different process and hopefully a different result than the last few times. But I think it's really interesting. So I am excited to see where this team goes here. But before we sign off, I'd be remiss if we didn't at least talk a little bit of playoffs and looking at these playoff games this weekend with our friends over at FanDuel, of course. And right now, it looks like the closest lines are 1.5 for these teams. So right now, I believe the Bills are 1.5 point home road favorites over the Broncos, which is kind of shocking to me. That one's on Saturday. I think the biggest spread of the week is I guess it's maybe tied here between the Rams and Niners. That doesn't look right. There's no way the Niners would be favored over the wait. Somebody put some weird lines in here. At any rate, no, it's the 49ers and the Seahawks, and the Seahawks are 7-point favorites over the 49ers per FanDuel. So that one seems kind of crazy to me too. So I don't know if I agree with these lines, Tre'Shon, but if you want to get spicy out there, there's the Seahawks and the 49ers, I know the Seahawks are like probably the better team, and the 49ers just seem to be getting more and more injured, but still a tough team to beat. I mean, that team is they've got Kyle Shanahan, so you can never really count them out.
Yeah. And the bye week always seems like a curse, Kevin. And it feels like everybody talks it up until the game happens, and then everybody's like, well, the team that's hot is obviously always the one that you want to be. Sometimes that bye week can hurt you. This, that, the other. Like, that discourse usually starts after the bye week team loses. But yeah, it is something to think about. The time off does not always do well for everybody involved. Some guys do not like that extra break, and they want to keep it rolling. So it'll be interesting to see 49ers coming off a pretty good win. I'm a little bit surprised as you are to hear that's the line. But that's the magic of playoff football. This is probably one of the best wild card weekends we've had in a long time. I mean, it was great.
Oh yeah.
From the first game to the last, even the Steelers beatdown was just kind of a crazy game because 23 points just came out of thin air in the fourth quarter for Houston. So that's why this sport is the best. It's why we're obsessed with it. Any given Sunday isn't just a cliche. It's real. It is how this sport operates, and you never know who could win that football game.
Yeah. I think the playoffs this year have been fantastic, and I think it's going to continue on this weekend. So I'm excited to get to that. But again, thanks once again to FanDuel for presenting Dirty Birds and Brews today. Thanks to those guys so much. And also want to, of course, thank Tre'Shon Diaz at Trey3Sean for coming on for some Tuesday takes. Tre'Shon, anything else you want to get to before we sign off today?
No. We will be here reading the tea leaves, trying to dissect all the information that we possibly can from the Falcons' continued search. And we appreciate all of you that are here with us.
Yes, thank you guys so much. It's going to be moving fast as we get through this search. There'll be a little lull here, I think, for like the next week, and then it might be pretty fast and furious all at once. So we'll see how that goes. We'll obviously have Falcaholic Live for you guys on Wednesday night, and then we will see what transpires. We'll get you guys shows as needed. We're going to be getting to some draft takes soon with the Senior Bowl coming up. So we'll be covering that once again for you guys. Probably get a pre-Senior Bowl mock draft going as well. So keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, we're just going to be keeping our eyes locked on the head coach and GM searches over the next week. And we'll see if any news leaks out or not. But we'll be here for you guys either way and continue breaking down the candidates as they come in. But thank you guys so much for joining us here on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. Please do like and subscribe here on YouTube if you haven't done so already. It really helps us out. Or leave us a 5-star review in your podcast platform of choice. That'd be really cool too. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/Falcaholic Live or YouTube channel memberships. Both very helpful. Thank you so much. And like I said, we'll be back real soon with more takes. We'll have some folks on Wednesday to continue breaking down these coaching candidates and the ongoing search. So until then, guys, thank you so much for hanging out. We will see you next time on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. Have a great day, folks.